Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the call Archie didn't take. Right now, over 85% of the people watching aren't subscribed. If you've been enjoying these Nero Wolfe stories, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to be sure you never miss the next mystery. Your support helps keep these stories alive and lets us keep bringing them to you. The dining room of the Brownstone always looked its best at 8 o'clock. Fritz had a way of setting the table that gave the impression he was serving an emperor rather than a sedentary detective who treated dinner as both ritual and necessity. The lamplight glowed on polished silver, the linen was white enough to shame snow, and Wolfe sat in his customary place with the unhurried gravity of a man fulfilling destiny. I took the chair to his right, as ever, and let Fritz lay before me a plate that smelled of garlic, thyme, and the kind of patience only a Swiss upbringing could explain. The first ring of the telephone cut across the clink of silver and the gentle scrape of porcelain. My instincts said business, and my muscles started their usual swing out of the chair. Fritz's frown landed squarely between my shoulder blades before I had the chance to rise. "Dinner," he declared, his accent tightening each syllable into iron. "No interruptions." "I'm not deaf," I told him, "but the instrument in the office is." Wolfe raised his eyes from the trout, heavy-lidded and reproving. "Sit, Archie. The telephone may wait 10 minutes. My digestion will not." The phone continued to ring, a measured insistence that travelled from the office to the dining room with the persistence of a creditor. I felt the muscles in my jaw flex. Fritz folded his arms in front of him as if he'd nail me to the chair. Wolfe picked a sprig of parsley from the platter, studied it, and discarded it with disdain before lifting his fork again. By the 10th ring, the caller gave up. Silence settled, thick as the cream soup Fritz ladled into Wolfe's bowl. I told myself that 90% of calls after 8 were crank inquiries or the sort of client who never wanted to pay. Still, I had the itch of a man who'd let the ball bounce past him without swinging. We finished the meal in peace, if you call Wolfe's lectures on the deficiencies of American butter peace. Fritz cleared with the noiseless precision of a stagehand changing scenery, and at last Wolfe leaned back, folded his napkin, and demanded his beer. The chilled glass arrived like a sacrament, and Wolfe's sigh after the first sip was the benediction. I excused myself, heading to the office with the stride of a man who'd waited longer than he liked. The lamplight in there had its own glow, amber shades, polished mahogany desk, the red leather client chairs empty and solemn. The telephone sat mute, as smug as a cat. I checked the pad beside it. No message. 10 minutes later, the bell sounded again. This time Fritz wasn't around to glare, and Wolfe was rooted in his chair with a second glass of beer, so I lifted the receiver. "Mr. Goodwin." The voice was nasal, keyed high with agitation. "This is the front desk at the Hotel Bonfort. A gentleman tried to reach Mr. Wolfe earlier this evening, Howard Fenwick. He insisted it was urgent. I regret to inform you he has just been found dead in his room." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Dead how?" "A revolver wound. They think suicide." The clerk swallowed audibly. "But he left no note. He'd asked repeatedly for your number before. He said only Mr. Wolfe could help him." I thanked him with the sort of courtesy you give a man bringing bad news you should have prevented. The line clicked dead, leaving me with the faint buzz of the receiver and the heavier buzz of guilt. When I turned, Wolfe was already watching from the doorway, vast shoulders filling the frame, his yellow silk house jacket glowing like an accusation. He must have followed on the change of my tone. He lifted a hand, palm down, signalling silence until I replaced the receiver. "You heard?" I asked. He moved to his chair with ponderous steps, lowered himself, and folded his hands on the desk blotter. "Enough." I gave him the details in as few words as possible. The dead man, the call I had not taken, the urgency missed. Wolfe's lips pressed together until they vanished beneath the moustache. "You regret it," he said. "Wouldn't you?" "No. Regret is sterile. Responsibility, however, is fertile. We shall see what it yields." The office had gone still except for the faint creak of the radiator and the distant clatter of Fritz stacking pans. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply as though scenting orchids instead of stale Manhattan air. "You reproach yourself for failing to answer," he he continued, opening them again. But one call suffices. The man is dead. His affairs and the reason he sought me are not. They will arrive, Archie. As surely as this beer glass requires filling, so too will the consequences arrive at our door. I leaned against the desk corner, arms folded. And when they do? He took another deliberate sip, set the glass down with finality, and fixed me with eyes as heavy as stone. Then, my dear Archie, we shall be the custodians of a mystery born of your omission. It is intolerable, but not unprofitable. The telephone, obediently quiet now, gleamed on the desk. I had the urge to rip the cord out and toss it into the street, but Wolfe would never permit disorder in his sanctuary. Instead, I stood, listening to the hollow in the air left by a call I had not taken, and knew that silence could be as damning as a shot in the dark. Fritz was clearing the last of the dinner dishes when the doorbell growled through the brownstone. Wolfe had settled into his chair in the office, beer glass close at hand, and his eyes half shut as if the world beyond the panelled walls no longer existed. Fritz would not answer the bell. It was never his duty. So I rose, crossed the hall, and opened the front door myself. Inspector Kramer barged in like a storm with a cigar jammed between his teeth. His hat was pushed back, his coat collar askew, and his face carried the complexion of a man ready to demolish furniture if given half an excuse. He didn't wait for an invitation. "Where's Wolfe?" he barked, and I had barely turned before he brushed past me, trailing the stench of tobacco and official indignation. Inside the office, the lamplight burned mellow across the shelves, the red leather chairs glowed, and Wolfe had arranged his bulk in the yellow throne as if carved there. He did not rise. He never did. His eyelids lifted an inch, enough to convey distaste at the intrusion. "Inspector," he murmured, "you're late for courtesy, early for despair." Kramer ground the cigar between his molars. "Spare me the poetry. Howard Fenwick is dead, shot in his hotel room. You know the name." Wolfe's brow creased the smallest degree, which in his language was a shout. "The lawyer? Yes." Kramer jabbed a finger. "He tried to call you tonight. More than once. The desk clerk swears he wanted Wolfe, nobody else. I want to know why." Wolfe looked to me without moving his head. His voice was calm, resonant, and about as warm as ice. "Archie?" I rubbed my neck. "I heard the first call. I didn't take it. Dinner." Kramer swung on me, eyes bulging. "Dinner? A man's dead because you were buttering rolls." I kept my tone steady, though his smoke could have felled a lesser man. "You've seen Fritz guard the sanctity of mealtime. By the time I reached the office, the line was dead. Later they called back with the news." Kramer spat the cigar into his hand and glared at Wolfe. "That's convenient. He wanted you, Wolfe. What did he have that scared him?" Wolfe reached for his glass, lifted it with the ceremony of a priest, and took a long sip before setting it down. "I cannot answer a question that presumes knowledge I do not possess. The man attempted to engage me. He failed. He is now beyond inquiry. I regret the coincidence, but refuse responsibility for it." "Coincidence, hell," Kramer snapped. "Fenwick was no saint. He had his fingers in a dozen pies, and most of them smelled of blackmail. You don't think he was reaching for you out of idle fancy?" "Perhaps not," Wolfe conceded. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again, clear and steady. "Nevertheless, conjecture is waste. What do you know?" Kramer dropped into one of the red chairs without asking, cigar rolling between his fingers. We found him sprawled across the bed, revolver in hand, powder burns on the temple. No note. He had been drinking but not soused. Hotel staff say he was jumpy all afternoon, telephoning clients, pacing the lobby. He went up to his room around 7, asked the desk to get Wolfe's number, and half an hour later he was dead. Wolfe folded his hands across his middle. "And you suppose that, had I lifted the receiver, the outcome would differ?" "I don't suppose. I know." Kramer jabbed the cigar toward him. "He thought you were the one man who could save him. That's why he called. And now he's gone, leaving me a mess of suspects and no clue which one shoved him into eternity." "Suicide, you said," Wolfe reminded. Kramer's mouth twisted. "The lab men hedge it. Position of the gun's awkward, angle isn't neat. Someone could have staged it. Until I'm sure, I call it murder." Silence stretched. The clock on Wolfe's desk ticked with exaggerated patience. He glanced at me, then back to Kramer. "Inspector, your indignation is genuine, though misdirected. You would prefer me to pledge abstinence. That is impossible. A man who dies while trying to hire me is, by the nature of the event, my concern. Kramer slapped his palm on the arm of the chair. That's exactly what I don't want. This case is mine. If you poke into it, you'll tangle the works. You sit tight and keep your mouth shut. I couldn't resist. He'll sit tight, sure enough, but his mouth, Inspector, is harder to manage than mine. Kramer shot me a glare, then shifted it back to Wolfe. Stay clear. If I find you meddling, I'll haul you both down to Center Street and let you cool your heels till kingdom come. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, not quite a sigh. Your threat is noted. Kramer rose, jammed the cigar back between his teeth and yanked his hat low. I mean it. Keep out of this. He stalked to the door, boots hammering against the floorboards, and vanished into the hall. A moment later, the slam of the front door echoed through the house. I leaned against the desk and let out a low whistle. That was cozy. You'd think he blames us for pulling the trigger. Wolfe did not move. His eyes had slipped half shut again, his fingers steepled against his vest. Phooey. Blame is his nourishment, but he is correct in one regard. The man sought me, he did not reach me. That deficiency is intolerable. We must discover why. I studied him. So you're in. Archie, he murmured. I was in the moment the telephone rang. The bell sounded at 11 the following morning, sharp as a rap on the knuckles. I crossed the hall from the office, opened the front door, and found a woman framed against the daylight with the composure of someone accustomed to being studied. She wore black, but not the black of despair. It was tailored, severe, with a line that said she would choose how grief was displayed. Her gloves were pearl grey, her veil discreet enough to show a face carved from pride and sleeplessness. Mrs. Fenwick? I asked. Yes. You are Mr. Goodwin. Her tone was brisk, meant to spare both of us wasted time. I ushered her into the office. She crossed the threshold without hesitation, the click of her heels precise against the parquet. Wolfe was already installed in the yellow chair, massive frame balanced with the indolent dignity of an emperor expecting tribute. He did not rise naturally, but his head inclined a fraction. Madam, he said, condolences are obligatory, though I abhor redundancy. Accept mine. She settled into a red chair opposite him, removing her gloves with neat tugs at each finger. Obligations are for the living, Mr. Wolfe. My husband is beyond them, but his name is not. Her eyes moved briefly toward me, assessing, then returned to Wolfe. They were cool eyes, not tear-blurred, and they carried an edge sharp enough to slice pretense. The police, she continued, would have the world believe Howard killed himself because he could not face exposure. They whisper of blackmail, of sordid threats, of payments demanded. It is intolerable. My husband was not a blackmailer. Kramer's visit the night before was still fresh in Wolfe's office air. I could see Wolfe's lips compress into a flat line before he spoke. The police, madam, are susceptible to conjecture, often convenient. What makes you so certain of his innocence? She drew in a breath, gloved hands folded in her lap. Howard had faults. Vanity, perhaps ambition, but never that. He lived by clients' trust. To betray it would have been anathema. Yet the suspicion is current, Wolfe said. Her chin lifted. And that is why I'm here. You will discover the truth. You will clear his name. I almost whistled. She didn't ask, she commanded, and her tone suggested refusal would be absurd. Wolfe, immovable as granite, let the silence stretch until it pressed against the corners of the room. Finally he spoke, precise as a gavel. Why me? Because Howard tried to reach you. She leaned forward, veil brushing the air. The hotel clerk told me. He believed only you could help him. That is enough for me. I shifted in my chair. Wolfe's gaze slid toward me, heavy and deliberate. Archie, he said, explain. I cleared my throat. He did call. While we were at dinner, I didn't take it. Later the hotel rang again, but by then he was gone. Her eyes fixed on me with sudden intensity, and for the first time her composure faltered. A tremor crossed her mouth. Then you... She stopped, steadied herself. No, blame is sterile, as you once said, Mr. Wolfe. What matters is what you will do now. Wolfe's brows lifted at the echo of his own philosophy, and he allowed himself a slow breath. Madam, you come not merely with grief, but with expectation. My involvement would invite conflict with Inspector Kramer, whose patience is limited. Nevertheless, if your retainer satisfies, I may act. She reached into a handbag, withdrew a slim checkbook, and wrote with the unhesitating pen of one long familiar with large figures. When she tore the slip free and placed it on Wolfe's blotter, the motion had finality. I leaned close enough to glimpse the number. It would keep the orchids content for several months. Wolfe glanced at it without touching. The sum suffices. However, madam, there is condition. Her head tilted. Yes? The omission of last evening, Wolfe said, eyes turning to me again. My assistant failed to take a call that might have prevented later confusion. Therefore, he must carry responsibility for redress. All inquiries, all exertions, will be his province. If you engage me, you engage him doubly. I started to protest, but Wolfe lifted a finger. The gesture brooked no interruption. Mrs. Fenwick's gaze rested on me again. Then I trust Mr. Goodwin will apply himself without error. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. She replaced her gloves with careful tugs, as though sealing the matter. Wolfe inclined his head. He will. The room settled into a silence broken only by the clock's steady ticking. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and faced Wolfe directly. The police will tell you lies. They believe what is convenient. But I expect facts. My husband was murdered. Fined by whom? Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then opened. Expectation is a burden, madam, but I will tolerate it. Archie will begin at once. She gave a small nod and moved toward the door. At the threshold she paused. I shall call tomorrow. Do not fail me. Then she was gone, her heels clipping decisively down the hall. When the front door shut, Wolfe let out a breath that might have been satisfaction. I turned on him. Much obliged. You've hung me like a coat on a hook. You omitted a call. He reached for his beer, untouched since morning. Now you shall make amends. Responsibility is fertile, Archie. Cultivate it. I muttered, but the truth of it was plain. The widow had brought money, pride, and a command. Wolfe had accepted, and that meant the hunt was ours. The Bonfort Hotel dressed itself with gilt mirrors and velvet carpets, but at 10:30 in the morning its lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and yesterday's cigars. Saul Panzer was waiting by the elevator, hands in his coat pockets, cap tilted low. He gave me the sort of nod a man reserves for allies rather than friends, then led me up without wasting syllables. The suite on the 7th floor had been sealed with a police strip across the door. The desk clerk, convinced by my best impersonation of Wolfe's authority and Saul's unblinking silence, had produced a key and vanished. Inside, the air held the stale tang of liquor, sweat, and something sharper. The metallic edge of powder burned the night before. The sitting room was tidy on the surface, a scatter of magazines, an empty glass on the table, drapes drawn against the morning glare. Yet the silence pressed too heavily, as if the walls remembered. Saul moved first, crouching with a precision that would have done credit to a safecracker. His eyes went to the ashtray. "One of these isn't standard," he said quietly. I leaned over his shoulder. 3 butts showed the Bonfort's gold crest, sold downstairs in the bar. The 4th was different, thinner, paper-marked with a foreign brand. "Guessed with exotic taste," I suggested. Saul shook his head. "Fenwick smoked the hotel kind. This one's fresh, maybe hours old." He set it aside in his handkerchief with a delicacy that would shame a museum curator. I moved into the bedroom. The bed was neatly remade by police hands, though a darker shadow on the carpet marked where he had fallen. The telephone rested on its stand, receiver crooked just enough to suggest haste. I lifted it, heard the thin buzz of a line not properly set. Whoever had touched it last hadn't taken time to replace it fully. Saul joined me. His eyes travelled the furniture, the closet door left ajar, a drawer half closed. "They were looking for something," he murmured. "Who?" "Not the police. They'd leave it tidy." I checked the desk. Papers gone, the blotter bare, but a torn corner of stationery had slid between the drawer and its frame. I teased it free. One word remained, ink bold against the white. Latimer. Saul's brows inched upward. "Mean anything?" "Not yet, but Wolfe will squeeze juice from it." I folded the scrap into my pocket. We moved through the suite with care. noting what had been overlooked. A faint ring of moisture on the nightstand showed where a glass had sweated recently. 2 matches lay by the lamp, unstruck. A book, spine cracked, sat face down on the chair, but the pages were blank inserts from a ledger, torn and abandoned. From the corridor came the echo of a heavy tread. Saul's head lifted, sharp as a hunting dog's. "Kramer," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. The rhythm of authority has its own sound. We slipped into the hall, closing the door behind us, and took the service stairs down before the elevator cables hummed. By the time Kramer's voice boomed through the lobby, we were already in the street, the city's clamour swallowing us whole. The brownstone had its usual mid-morning quiet, broken only by the faint clink of crockery as Fritz prepared Wolfe's breakfast tray in the kitchen below. Wolfe had been with his orchids until 11, and now he occupied the yellow chair with the air of a monarch returned from campaign. On his desk rested the morning mail, already slit open, though he had given each envelope no more than the laziest of glances. I had been dispatched to locate Fenwick's client list, a task that demanded charm, patience, and 1 or 2 favours called in over the telephone. By noon I had compiled enough names to make a banker blush, and I laid the sheet before Wolfe with the satisfaction of a man who had juggled half the city without dropping a ball. He glanced at it, then leaned back with a grunt. "Condense." "The shortlist," I said, "consists of 4 worth more than the rest combined. Oscar Latimer, shipping magnate, likes to be called Captain, though he never commanded more than a boardroom. Vivian Starr, Broadway actress with a voice like champagne and a reputation that bubbles nearly as much. Carter Lang, Wall Street broker, too slick to keep his own wife convinced. And Assemblyman Joel Harrison, reform politician, saint in speeches, less so in his campaign ledger." Wolfe's lids drooped as he listened, fingers steepled on his vest. "Each," he said, "has influence in a separate sphere. Commerce, entertainment, finance, politics. Curious." "Curious?" I asked. "Or profitable for a lawyer who didn't mind blurring the line between retainer and leverage?" "Blackmail," Wolfe said flatly. "It suggests itself." I perched on the edge of the desk. "You think Fenwick was playing all 4? "I think," Wolfe replied, "that diversity of prey is the mark of appetite. Yet one must ask, whose appetite?" Before I could answer, Fritz entered with the lunch service. At precisely 1 o'clock, he set out the soup with a dignity that forbade conversation until Wolfe had sampled it. I waited, watching the steam curl from the bowl until Wolfe's spoon returned to the plate. "Fenwick," he said, "may have been conduit rather than instigator. A lawyer holds confidences. To betray them risks ruin, yet if pressed or tempted, he might serve another's interest." I said, "Meaning one of those 4 hired him not to defend, but to dig?" "Possibly," Wolfe murmured. "We shall discover." I spread the papers again. "Which first?" "You will see them all." He dabbed his lips with a napkin. "Begin with the actress. Vanity often cracks before discretion." I made a note. "Vivian Starr this afternoon. I'll need to catch her between rehearsals." "Lang tomorrow," Wolfe continued. "A broker's office is busiest in the morning, and observation then may prove instructive. Harrison, you may approach last. Politicians exhaust themselves most on weekends. His guard will be lower by Monday." "And Latimer?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "The name on the scrap you retrieved. He is pivotal, but we must not show our hand prematurely. He will come to us once pressure mounts." I leaned back, stretching my legs. "So, the plan is, actress, broker, politician. Latimer waits." "Precisely." Wolfe reached for his glass of beer, the chilled rim leaving a ring on the coaster. "Archie, remember, you are the face of our inquiry. If you blunder, we are blind." "I'll try not to shame your orchids." His glare was mild but pointed. Fritz, clearing plates, allowed himself the faintest of coughs, as if to remind me that humour at the table remained hazardous. After lunch, Wolfe retired for his customary postprandial immersion in books, leaving me at the desk to sharpen the details of the day's itinerary. I telephoned a stage door contact and arranged a time with Miss Starr, who apparently considered private appointments a species of flattery. My typewriter clattered as I drew up brief dossiers on Lang and Harrison, facts distilled for Wolfe's satisfaction later. The house grew quiet again, the hum of traffic filtering through the window blinds. I sat with the list of names before me, 4 signatures heavy with wealth and ambition, and felt the weight of a dead lawyer's untaken call pressing at the edges. Somewhere among those clients lay fear strong enough to kill. When Wolfe returned to the office at 4, refreshed and composed, I read him the notes I'd gathered. He listened without comment until I finished, then folded his hands. "The pattern holds," he said. "Each client harbours secrets that could furnish a blackmailer's purse. Fenwick's death is not merely consequence of private weakness, it is nexus. Pursue them, Archie. Strip away their defences, and we shall see which secret was worth a man's life." I slid the notes into my pocket, picked up my hat, and headed for the door. My rounds were beginning. The Hudson Theatre was between shows, but the corridors hummed with half-dressed stagehands, chorus girls in robe and slippers, and the constant shuffle of props being shifted for evening performance. The smell of grease paint mixed with dust from the curtains, and every voice carried too brightly, as though the boards demanded projection. I gave my name at the stage door and was led down a corridor lined with gilt-framed posters, each featuring Vivian Starr's face in different poses of triumph. She had been the city's darling for 6 years, and from the look of the flowers stacked in the hall, she still held that crown. Her dressing-room door bore her name in gilt letters, larger than any of the men in the cast. A maid with a pince-nez let me in. The room was cramped but lavishly arranged. Silk cushions on the chaise, mirrored walls ringed with bright bulbs, vases of roses on every flat surface. Vivian herself sat before the mirror, a robe of emerald silk wrapped loosely around her, hair pinned up but not yet coiffed for performance. She glanced at me in the mirror before turning, her eyes cool and measured. "You're Mr. Goodwin," she said. Her voice carried the timbre of the stage, low but distinct. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, tipping my hat. "I represent Mr. Nero Wolfe. I hoped for a few minutes." Her hand waved toward the chaise. "The chair is uncomfortable. The chaise is better. You must excuse the disorder. One does not prepare for Hamlet as one prepares for tea." I sat, watching her light a cigarette and exhale a plume toward the ceiling. The room thickened with the sweet odour of Turkish tobacco. She studied me as though I were an auditioning understudy. "You knew Howard Fenwick," I began. Her eyes flickered but did not lower. "Yes. He advised me in certain matters. A lawyer is indispensable in my profession." "He was killed," I said. "I read the papers." She tapped ash delicately into a tray shaped like a mask. "Suicide, they claim. But you did not come here to repeat headlines." "No," I agreed. "I came because we represent his widow. She believes the police are eager to blame him for things he did not do. Mr. Wolfe has been engaged to learn the truth. My job is to gather the edges. You are one." She laughed without humour. "Edges. You make it sound as though we are fraying cloth. Very well, Mr. Goodwin, ask." I leaned forward. "What did Fenwick know about you that mattered?" She stilled, cigarette halfway to her lips. Her reflection in the mirror betrayed more than her face did, a tightening of the jaw, a flick of unease in her eyes. She inhaled, then let the smoke drift slowly. "He knew," she said quietly, "that I am married." I kept my voice neutral. "Married? That would hardly shock anyone in Manhattan." "To him." She turned fully now, eyes sharp. "Richard Lyle. He is my rival on stage and in the public's eye. If it were known we were wed, our reputations would curdle. We are supposed to be adversaries. The public adores the rivalry. It sells tickets. Producers would consider it betrayal." I considered that. "So Fenwick knew. Did he hold it over you?" Her lips curved into something like disdain. "He never threatened me. He advised me. He said concealment was wise, that revelation would harm us both. He was sympathetic." "Sympathy isn't a legal specialty." Her gaze hardened. "You suggest blackmail." "I suggest motive. A lawyer with secrets is a man with leverage. Did he ask for money?" She shook her head, quick and firm. "No, I swear it. He never asked. He was discreet." "Yet others claim he was pressing them," I said. "You might not have been alone in his confidences." Her fingers tightened on the cigarette, crushing the paper slightly. "If others say that, they lie. Howard was many things, but not base. He knew how fragile I am in the eyes of the press. He never exploited it." I watched her, the tremor in her hand, the way her voice clung too tightly to certainty. "You're an actress, Miss Starr. Forgive me if I prefer evidence to performance." Her eyes flashed, but the anger cooled as quickly as it rose. She dropped the cigarette, crushed it, and rose to pour herself a drink from the decanter on the side table. The liquid caught the mirror light as she poured. "You think me a liar," she said calmly. "But understand, fear does not equal guilt. I fear scandal more than death. If that makes me appear false, then so be it." "Fear has its own weight," I replied. "Did anyone else know of the marriage?" "Only Howard. And now you. If you betray me, you will destroy more than a career." I stood, adjusting my hat. "I don't make a habit of destroying careers. I look for killers. If Fenwick used your secret, it matters. If he didn't, then perhaps someone else did. Either way, Mr. Wolfe will know." She set the glass down untouched, her face unreadable. "Tell Mr. Wolfe this. Howard Fenwick was not my enemy. Whatever others say, remember that." I nodded, but inside I filed her words with the tone that contradicted them. She had lied, whether from fear of scandal or to protect something darker, I could not yet tell. The stage manager knocked, announcing rehearsal. She turned away, already absorbed by the mirror and the layers of disguise it offered. I left by the same corridor, past the flowers and the posters, the scent of powder clinging to my coat. Outside, the city air struck cooler, but the echo of her voice stayed sharp. Somewhere between her marriage and her fear lay the truth, and it was my task to bring it to Wolfe intact. Wall Street at 9:30 in the morning can make a man believe that money breathes. The canyons between the buildings are narrow, and the sun doesn't reach them until late, but the sidewalks pulse with men in suits, clerks running with paper bundles, and messengers weaving through like alley cats. The sound is a constant clash of voices, heels, and the metallic shriek of the elevated a few blocks west. I had dressed in my second-best suit, the one respectable enough to gain admittance without looking like I was there to sell bonds myself. Carter Lang kept his office in a building with marble columns out front and an elevator boy who inspected my shoes before pulling the brass lever. On the way up, a man in a bowler hat complained about steel futures, and another cursed a telephone line that wouldn't clear. Everyone seemed to carry a nervous tick in his pocket, and it jingled louder than coins. The secretary outside Lang's office had lacquered hair and a typewriter that rattled like machine gun fire. She glanced up when I gave my name and said, "Mr. Lang is engaged. You may wait." Her tone put me a notch below the janitor. I waited. Brokers' offices aren't built for comfort. They're built to remind you that time is money, and you own neither. The outer room had 3 chairs, all hard wood. The wall clock ticked like it was deducting seconds from my balance. I counted each one until the inner door flew open. Lang himself came out in a rush of paper and irritation. He was trim, not tall, with the sharp jaw of a man who shaved twice daily, and eyes that cut like broken glass. His tie was knotted but already pulling loose, and his shirt cuffs carried ink smudges. He scanned the room, saw me, and barked, "Goodwin? Come in, come in. Make it quick, I'm late for a call." The secretary raised her eyes toward heaven in silent tribute to her employer's charm. I followed Lang into the office and closed the door. The room had a window overlooking a brick wall, a desk the size of a billiard table, and more papers than a courthouse. They were everywhere, piled on the blotter, stacked in tottering columns on the floor, scattered across chairs. The only clear space was the telephone, placed dead center, its receiver glistening like a lifeline. Lang circled behind the desk and dropped into his chair as though gravity had doubled. "Well," he demanded, "what do you want from me?" I smiled pleasantly, took one of the chairs that hadn't collapsed under paper, and stretched my legs. "I represent Nero Wolfe. We're making inquiries into Howard Fenwick's death." That stopped him a half-second, though he masked it quickly by grabbing a sheet and pretending to read. "Yes, unfortunate, but irrelevant to me. Howard handled a minor matter, that's all." "Minor," I repeated. "What kind of minor?" "Routine contract work, clauses, signatures, things a clerk could manage." His tone was dismissive, but the pen in his hand tapped the paper in nervous rhythm. He liked to fuss over details. "Lawyers usually do," I agreed, "but this lawyer called you more than once. He called you often enough to be described as pestering, and he died the same evening he was trying to reach Wolfe." Lang's eyes flicked to the telephone, then back to me. "Coincidence." "That word keeps getting popular," I said. "First Kramer, now you. Maybe it'll be the word of the year." He set the pen down hard. "Look, Fenwick was thorough. He thought there was an irregularity in some securities I purchased for a client. He was mistaken. That's it. I leaned forward. And what did you tell him? That he was wrong. Yet he kept calling. Because he was stubborn, Lang snapped. His hand swept across the blotter, scattering papers. You want a confession? Fine. I lost my patience with him. He was wasting my time. And now he's dead. Lang's face darkened. I didn't kill him. If that's your insinuation, you can go straight back to Wolfe and tell him to keep his orchids out of this. He rarely lets me carry messages like that, I said. He prefers facts, such as where you were the night Fenwick died. His eyes narrowed. Dinner at the Union Club, 8 o'clock, afterward home. My wife can confirm. That's tidy, I remarked. Who else saw you? Half the club, the waiter, the doorman. Do you want me to provide their names? That would help. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, realizing what he had just offered. His fingers straightened the papers with too much force. Tell Wolfe this, he said coldly. Howard Fenwick was a nuisance, but nothing more. If the man had enemies, they're not on Wall Street. I stood, glancing at the desk. The top sheet had been filled with figures in pencil, some erased, rewritten, and erased again. Men sure of their books don't rewrite them 3 times. His eyes followed mine, and he covered the page with his hand. I'll pass along your cooperation, I said. If Wolfe has further questions, he'll send me back. Lang rose quickly, shorter than me, but bristling with a temper that tried to add inches. Do that, and next time make an appointment. I tipped my hat and left, hearing the telephone ring behind me before the door shut. His voice, clipped and urgent, followed me down the hall. Back at the brownstone that afternoon, the office was cool, the shades drawn, and Wolfe sat with a glass of beer, sweating gently on the coaster. I reported while he listened, his eyes half closed, head tilted as though the ceiling might offer further data. When I finished, he sighed. Carter Lang is a man afraid of arithmetic. Meaning? Meaning the numbers on his desk accuse him louder than you did. Fear of arithmetic, Archie, often leads to worse crimes than fear of pistols. I set my notes down. So, we keep him on the list. Indeed. Wolfe lifted the glass, took a long sip, and set it down with delicate finality, very near the top. Lunch in the brownstone was an affair that could shame a diplomat's banquet, even on a weekday. Fritz set the table with silver polished bright enough to make you squint, laid out the napkins as though they were flags of surrender, and glided from sideboard to chair with the gravity of a man entrusted with civilization's last defense. At 1 o'clock sharp, Wolfe descended from his morning with the orchids, his bulk measured step by step, and lowered himself into his seat. I took mine on the right, ready for the meal and whatever lecture he intended to deliver between courses. The first dish was consommé with a delicate ribbon of herbs, steam curling like smoke signals above the rim. Wolfe sampled, closed his eyes, and gave Fritz a solemn nod of approval. The Swiss beamed faintly, then retreated to fetch the next course. It was during this pause that Wolfe opened his eyes fully, fixed me with a look, and said, Our clients, potential and actual, present a spectrum of appetites. Each bears consideration. I had barely raised my spoon when Fritz reappeared, setting down a platter of veal cutlets glazed in a sauce that would have made lesser men swear eternal devotion. He frowned at Wolfe's words. At table, Fritz declared, we speak of food, not death. Wolfe ignored him entirely, the way a mountain ignores a bird that lands upon it. He turned to me again. Vivian Starr fears scandal more than prison. Carter Lang fears arithmetic. Joel Harrison fears exposure of hypocrisy. Latimer, he fears nothing, which is suspicious. Fritz's eyebrows darted upward, his hands pressing the air in protest. Please, Herr Wolfe, not murder while I serve. Fritz, Wolfe said, without shifting his gaze from me, you are steward of the kitchen, guardian of the stove, and sovereign of this table's flavour. But I am master of the inquiry. If death intrudes upon a meal, blame the murderer, not me. Fritz muttered something sharp in Swiss German and departed, shoulders stiff. I grinned and cut into the veal. You provoke him on purpose. He must be reminded, Wolfe said, chewing slowly, that the world is not confined to sauces. He'd say it ought to be. Wolfe took a long draught of beer, savouring it. Then he leaned back, napkin spread wide across his vest. What did you glean from Miss Starr? I gave him the outline, sticking to the essentials: her hidden marriage, her insistence that Fenwick had kept her secret safe, her trembling hand on the cigarette. Wolfe listened, lids half closed. She lied, he concluded. Obviously, I said, but whether from fear or guilt I couldn't tell. Both are possible, Wolfe murmured, but her lie will not withstand examination. We shall press it later. Fritz returned with a salad of greens flecked with walnuts. He caught the drift of our conversation still hanging over the table and thumped the bowl down harder than necessary. I warn you, Herr Wolfe, he said, if the kitchen becomes a police station, I will serve bread and water, nothing more. You will do no such thing, Wolfe retorted calmly, selecting a walnut with his fork. Discipline is your pride. You would not wound your own creation. Fritz sniffed and retreated again. I ate in silence for a while, watching Wolfe's eyes move as he turned ideas round like chess pieces. The scrape of cutlery was the only sound until the doorbell rang faintly from the hall. I pushed back my chair, but Wolfe raised a hand. Not you, Fritz. I almost laughed. Fritz never answered the door, but after a moment he appeared, scowling. It is Mr. Pantzer, he said, clearly relieved it wasn't some intruder bent on spoiling the roast. Saul Pantzer entered, cap in hand, face as expressionless as ever. He nodded to Wolfe, gave me a brief glance, and said, I checked your lead, Archie. The Bonfort Hotel staff saw Latimer near the lobby the evening Fenwick died. That froze the table. Fritz stood forgotten, clutching the platter he had been about to clear. Wolfe lowered his fork and frowned, deep creases lining his forehead. Describe precisely. Saul never wasted words. Dorman saw him enter around 7:30. Latimer asked for Fenwick's room number, then left before the clerk could give it. Said he'd return later. He didn't. And you trust this? Wolfe asked. Saul nodded once. I checked twice. Both men swore. Neither knew why it mattered. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. The air in the dining room thickened, though the window stood open to the garden. At last he opened them again. The scrap of paper with his name found in Fenwick's room gains weight. It is not random. He was there. Fritz slammed the platter on the sideboard. Enough! I will not have such talk poisoning lunch. Herr Wolfe, if you insist on corpses at table, I shall leave you to your own cooking. He marched out before Wolfe could reply, the kitchen door swinging shut like a gavel. I smothered a grin. Saul, Wolfe said, unperturbed, you will continue to shadow Latimer, record his movements, his contacts, his vices. Archie will pursue Harrison tomorrow. We must learn which secret drove Fenwick to desperation. Saul inclined his head and slipped out as quietly as he had entered. Wolfe turned to me, brow still furrowed. Oscar Latimer, a titan of shipping, skulking in a hotel lobby, inquiring after a lawyer he has no public connection with. Explain it. Maybe he was checking freight rates, I suggested. Phooey. Wolfe's lips curled. He wanted something from Fenwick, and now Fenwick is dead. Concealment breeds motive. His gaze shifted, heavy and deliberate. Our circle of clients forms a pattern, Archie. Commerce, finance, politics, the stage. No man arranges such variety by accident. Someone was using Fenwick to tug at secrets across every arena. I finished my salad, watching him brood. The creases on his brow did not ease, and I knew the rest of lunch would pass with only his thoughts for company. The afternoon carried that peculiar hush that sometimes hangs over the brownstone when Wolfe withdraws into thought. The shades in the office were drawn against the sun, casting long slats of shadow across the rug. Wolfe had sunk into the yellow chair, his eyes half closed, a glass of beer sweating gently on the coaster beside him. I sat at my desk, filing notes with more noise than efficiency, when the telephone split the quiet with its sharp ring. I lifted the receiver, expecting Lon Cohen with a query, or Saul checking in. Instead, it was Lon himself, but his tone lacked its usual sardonic curl. Archie, brace yourself. Carter Lang's dead. I felt the blood thump once in my ears. Dead how? Shot, in his office on Pine Street. They're calling it suicide. That's convenient, I muttered. And improbable. Lon sighed. The papers will run it as suicide. The police haven't settled. I thought you'd want it fast. I thanked him, hung up and turned. Wolfe hadn't moved. His eyes were still closed, but I knew he had registered every vibration in my voice. "Lang," I said, my own voice tight. "Found shot. In his office. They're calling it suicide." Wolfe opened his eyes, dark and steady. He didn't answer. I pushed back from the desk, pacing the rug. "That's 2 in as many days, and both of them tried to reach you first. If I'd taken that blasted call—" "Archie," Wolfe's tone was soft but final. "We do not indulge in useless regret." "Useless? If I'd picked up— Pfui." He shut his eyes again. "A man is dead. Responsibility lies with his killer, not with you." Before I could answer, the bell sounded. Fritz appeared, reluctant as ever. "It is Inspector Kramer," he said, disapproval sharp in his accent. Kramer came in like a storm, chewing his cigar flat and snapping his coat open as though it weighed too much. He didn't waste time on warnings. "City Hall's crawling all over me," he barked. 2 deaths in 2 days, both men tied to you. The press is screaming cover-up, the commissioner wants blood, and I've got nothing but corpses dressed up as suicides." He dropped into a chair without asking, tugging off his hat like it was choking him. "If there's a blackmailer cleaning house in this city, Wolfe, he's moving faster than I can keep up. I need a name, and I need it yesterday." Wolfe, calm as granite, only said, "The pattern is imperfect, therefore false, but the hand behind it is consistent. We will find him." Kramer cursed under his breath, jammed his hat back on, and left with a slam that rattled the panes. The office settled into silence again, thick as molasses, while Wolfe leaned back and murmured, "Archie, every detail you took from Lang, read it. Slowly." "Well?" he barked. "You've heard?" "Yes," Wolfe said calmly. "Don't give me that tone," Kramer growled, dropping into a red chair. "Lang's been found shot behind his desk, revolver in his right hand, bullet through the temple. Same damn picture as Fenwick, only messier. Press screams suicide, I scream murder." Wolfe's brows lifted slightly. "Why murder?" "Because I've seen suicide. Men don't put a gun to their head in an office with the ledger open in front of them, numbers all crossed out. And because Lang was too slick to eat his own bullet. Somebody wanted him silenced." I said, "He told me Fenwick was pestering him over a routine matter. Now he's gone. If that isn't motive to cover something, I'll turn in my license." Kramer jabbed the cigar. "You were in his office yesterday." "Correct," I said. He was twitchy as a man waiting for the hangman. "Then you know," Kramer snapped, "what he was hiding." "Not exactly. He played his cards too close." Kramer turned back to Wolfe. 2 deaths in 2 days. Both men lawyers call pests, both tied to you. What the hell is going on?" Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Inspector, you mistake me for Providence. I do not arrange men's deaths. I am engaged to discover why they occur." "Then do it fast," Kramer said grimly. "Because if there's a blackmailer loose in this city, he's cleaning house, and I don't have the patience to watch bodies pile up." Wolfe closed his eyes, head tilting back. "The pattern is imperfect. Therefore, it is false." Kramer scowled. "What the devil does that mean?" "It means," Wolfe said slowly, "that 2 deaths, both arranged as suicides, suggest a design. Yet the design is flawed. Fenwick had no gun. Lang had one. Fenwick's room was in disarray. Lang's office reeked of staged order. Consistency would serve the murderer better. Therefore, this pattern is false. Something is wrong." Kramer chewed the cigar until it looked mangled. "I don't care for riddles, Wolfe. I want names." "You will have them when I am ready," Wolfe said, eyes still closed. Kramer surged to his feet, hat in hand. "You'd better not be holding out on me. 2 deaths, Wolfe. If a third drops, I'll drag you both downtown until you sing." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence afterward was thick enough to cut. Fritz, lingering in the hall, muttered about the sanctity of meals and slammed the dining room door for punctuation. I dropped into my chair, rubbing my forehead. That makes 2 men dead who might have spilled something useful. At this rate, our client list will clear itself before we get to them. Wolfe's eyes opened again. He stared at the ceiling, lips pressed tight, fingers steepled against his chest. Minutes passed. I knew better than to disturb him when he retreated into that cave of thought. At last he spoke. "The pattern is imperfect," he repeated. "Therefore it is false. We must search for the hand that misdrew it. His gaze shifted to me. Archie, assemble every note you made on Lang. His words, his desk, his alibi. Omit nothing. I opened the drawer, pulled my notebook and began reading. His eyes closed again, but I knew he heard every syllable, storing each fragment against the next. Outside, the city roared with horns and engines, but inside the brownstone the only sound was my voice carrying Lang's lies into the air, while Wolfe searched the cracks for truth. And I cursed, not for the first time, that I had let a phone ring unanswered. It was one of those afternoons when Wolfe had barricaded himself behind silence. He sat in the yellow chair, his bulk settled like a statue, eyes half closed, hands resting on his stomach in that pyramid of fingers he used when thinking. The air in the office was heavy with the smell of polished wood and books that hadn't been opened in years. I was at my desk, typing up notes with more noise than efficiency, when the bell rang from the hall. Fritz appeared almost instantly, which was unusual. He was still in his apron and clearly annoyed. "Herr Wolfe," he said, "there is a man who insists on entering. He is, how shall I say, forceful. I told him to wait, but he was cut off when the door to the office swung open without benefit of my hand on the knob. A tall man strode in, past Fritz, with the confidence of someone who never waited for permission. His presence filled the doorway before he spoke a word. Oscar Latimer. I had seen photographs in the financial pages, but they hadn't captured the sheer mass of him. He was broad through the chest, shoulders squared as though a ship's deck had been built across them, his face ruddy from years of sun at harbours he probably only visited for christenings. His grey hair was cropped close, his suit expensively cut, but straining at the seams. He removed his hat without grace and planted himself on the rug in front of Wolfe's desk. "Wolfe," he said, his voice booming, "I demand to know why your men are following me." I shut my typewriter and leaned back, watching the show. Fritz retreated, scandalized at the invasion, and closed the door behind him. Wolfe didn't move. He opened his eyes a fraction and looked at Latimer as though examining a beetle that had landed on his sleeve. "My men," Wolfe said slowly, "do not follow without cause." "They're dogging my steps," Latimer thundered. "Everywhere I go, restaurants, clubs, the docks, I see them. I will not be hounded. I came here to put an end to it." Wolfe shifted slightly, no more than a flicker of movement. "You are presumptuous, sir. You enter unbidden. You demand explanations. Sit." Latimer glared, then dropped heavily into the nearest red chair, which groaned under him. He set his hat on the arm and leaned forward. "I deny ever meeting Howard Fenwick. You hear me? I never spoke with him, never had business with him. I don't know why your lackeys tie my name to his." Wolfe's eyes closed again. "Archie." I opened the drawer, withdrew the torn scrap of stationery we had found in Fenwick's hotel desk, and laid it neatly on the blotter before Wolfe. He didn't touch it. He simply opened his eyes and let them rest on the single word written there, Latimer. Wolfe said, "Explain this." For the first time, Latimer's composure faltered. He stared at the paper as though it might leap up and strangle him. His jaw tightened, sweat springing at his temples. He reached out, then thought better of it, drawing his hand back. "It proves nothing," he said roughly, a name scrawled on paper. "There are a dozen Latimers in the city." Wolfe's lips curled faintly. "None as conspicuous as you. And you were seen, sir, at the Bonfort Hotel the evening Fenwick died. You asked for his room number. You intended to see him." "That is a lie," Latimer roared, slamming a fist on the arm of the chair. "I never set foot in that hotel. I'll sue the man who said so." I leaned back, enjoying the spectacle. Doormen are hard to shake in court. They have memories like safes. Latimer swung his head toward me, eyes blazing, then back to Wolfe. "This is harassment. I came here to end it." "Then end it," Wolfe said coldly. "Tell the truth." The shipping magnate's face reddened further. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, then stuffed it back into his pocket. "I did not meet Fenwick. I had no business with him. That is final." "Final?" Wolfe murmured. "Nothing is final until the truth is settled. Your denial is bold, too bold for innocence." Latimer surged to his feet. "You insult me!" "Yes." Wolfe's eyes opened fully now, dark and piercing. "Because you insult reason. You stand before me, trembling like a barge in storm. yet insist you never met a man whose name appears in his own hand, in his own room, on the eve of his death. You sweat, you shout, but you do not persuade." Latimer grabbed his hat. "I'll not sit here and be mocked." "Then stand," Wolfe said indifferently. "But know this, shadowing you will continue until the truth emerges." The man's breath came heavy. For a moment I thought he might lunge across the desk, but Wolfe's immovable bulk and gaze held him where he stood. He jammed the hat on his head, wheeled toward the door, and stalked out. The floorboards trembled under his weight. Fritz appeared instantly, glaring at the retreating back as though propriety itself had been assaulted. "I told him he could not enter," Fritz said indignantly. "He entered," Wolfe replied. Fritz muttered something about barbarians at the gate and vanished back toward the kitchen. I whistled low. That's a man who doesn't enjoy being cornered. Wolfe closed his eyes again, leaning back into the depths of the chair. "Too bold," he murmured. "Far too bold for innocence." The silence stretched. Outside, a car horn bleated in the street. Inside, Wolfe's words lingered, heavy as a verdict not yet passed. I went back to the Hudson Theatre the next afternoon. Something in Miss Starr's performance hadn't rung true. She had claimed Fenwick was sympathetic, but the tremor in her hand told me otherwise. So this was a return visit, not a debut. Her dressing room smelled of powder and wilted roses. I found her bent over a fireplace, a match in hand and a paper about to burn. I caught it before the flame took hold. A letter on Fenwick's stationery, demanding $5,000 to keep her marriage secret. So much for her earlier story. "Burning evidence," I remarked. "That's usually a privilege reserved for guilty parties." Her mask cracked. The poised actress from yesterday gave way to a woman cornered. "Yes," she whispered. "He demanded it. I paid him once. I thought it would end there, but it never did. He always wanted more." I sat across from her, the letter crackling in my pocket. "Yesterday you told me he never threatened you, that he was discreet." She turned her face away. "I lied. I was terrified. If the truth of my marriage came out, my career would collapse. He knew it. He pressed until I broke." Her confession spilled faster now, fear loosening her tongue. She admitted Fenwick had joked once that Carter Lang was his real prize, that whatever he held over her was nothing compared to what he had on Lang. When I left her there, shaking on the chaise, the neat denial from our first interview was gone. All that remained was a frightened woman and a blackmailer's letter that proved her lies. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the city had settled into its late afternoon rhythm. The traffic hummed on 35th Street, horns calling back and forth like argumentative crows, and the sidewalks carried their steady march of clerks, secretaries, and delivery boys. Inside, however, all sound was muffled under the heavy hush of the office. The room smelled of leather bindings, the faint tang of polish, and Wolfe's beer already sweating on its coaster. He sat in his yellow chair, deeper than usual, eyes half closed, fingers steepled at his chin. The light from the west window struck his face obliquely, casting the lines of it into sharper planes. I dropped my hat onto the rack and crossed to my desk. "You're ready?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said, "but we will proceed." I sat, pulling out my notebook. "You want me to start?" "Later. First, listen." His voice carried that inflection which meant I should keep my tongue in check. He inhaled deeply, then let the words flow, deliberate, each syllable chosen. "Fenwick was a blackmailer. That is incontrovertible. Miss Starr confirmed the payments, and the letter you seized is conclusive. He preyed upon secrets, not only hers but many. He had discovered a fertile trade." I nodded, though I kept silent. "Consider Carter Lang," Wolfe continued, "a broker whose books trembled with imbalance. Fenwick learned of it and pressed. Lang, cornered, sought to contain the damage. He attempted to reach me, desperate perhaps for defense, perhaps for advice. His call was not answered. That omission allowed events to proceed unchecked." I grimaced but didn't interrupt. He opened his eyes briefly, noted the expression and closed them again. "Lang went to Fenwick's hotel. There was a struggle, or perhaps only a confrontation. Fenwick ended dead, not by suicide, but by Lang's hand. Evidence is circumstantial but sufficient. The irregularities in Lang's records, the nervous manner you observed, his attempt at alibis stitched too hastily." Wolfe paused for a long drink of beer, The glass clinked as he set it down. But that is only half. Lang might have hidden his crime, yet Oscar Latimer intruded. Latimer was seen at the Bonfort Hotel the same evening. He asked for Fenwick. Why? Not for business of shipping. He sought opportunity. He found instead the aftermath. Fenwick dead, Lang disordered, perhaps even the scene itself unguarded. Latimer recognized a lever. He could profit, extort, manipulate. He held Lang in his grasp. I said, which explains Lang's twitching when I asked questions. He wasn't just worried about Fenwick. He was worried about Latimer squeezing the life out of him. Precisely. Wolfe's eyes opened, dark and steady. Lang was trapped twice, first by Fenwick's discovery, second by Latimer's knowledge. His death followed swiftly. Murder, arranged to mimic suicide, a revolver placed in his hand, his ledgers displayed like stage scenery. It was a tableau constructed for the press, but it bore the mark of haste. 2 deaths in 2 days, both convenient to Latimer. The pattern was imperfect, but the motive was plain. I scribbled a few lines in the notebook. So Latimer killed Lang to keep the leverage all his own. Yes. Wolfe closed his eyes again, sinking deeper into the chair. A man of Latimer's disposition cannot abide being a witness only. He must control. He silenced Lang before Lang could protest, or before the law could pry the truth free. He risked much, but arrogance is the twin of power. The room held stillness, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. Fritz entered briefly with the tray of cheese and biscuits, set it down, and departed without a word. He disapproved of crime during meals, but the hour was past lunch and before dinner, so perhaps he allowed a truce. I poured myself a glass of milk, nibbled at a biscuit, and watched Wolfe brood. "And the cigarettes?" I asked. "Elementary," he said without opening his eyes. "In Fenwick's hotel room you observed an ashtray containing a brand he did not smoke. That brand, imported and favoured by Latimer. It is corroboration, minor but consistent." "Along with the scrap of paper," I added. "Yes, the fragment bearing his name. Why would Fenwick write it? Because he expected a meeting, or had already met. It is damning, unless one contorts into fantasies." I let out a breath. So to recap, Fenwick blackmailed Lang. Lang killed Fenwick. Latimer discovered it, exploited it, then killed Lang to shut him up. Neat. "No," Wolfe said curtly, "not neat. Untidy, clumsy, but adequate. The murderer relied on haste and spectacle rather than art. Still, the sequence is coherent." He reached for another glass of beer, replacing the empty with deliberate care. His brow furrowed as he drank. "We must act," he said finally. "Summon them, Miss Starr, Latimer, Harrison, and Mrs. Fenwick. The remaining circle. They must be confronted together. The web must be displayed before them." I rose, reaching for the telephone. "All at once?" "Yes. This evening, 8 o'clock. Inform Kramer as well. He will resist, but he must be present. The confrontation must bear authority." I dialed, beginning the tedious round of calls. Wolfe closed his eyes once more, folding his hands upon his stomach, already withdrawing into that stillness that no noise of the city could break. By 8 o'clock, the brownstone had the air of a theatre before curtain. The lights were steady, the chairs set, and Wolfe ensconced in his yellow throne behind the desk. I had laid out the red chairs opposite in neat formation, polished enough to blind a careless sitter. Fritz had scowled at the arrangement, but withdrew to the kitchen, muttering that murderers should not be entertained where gentlemen once sat. The first to arrive was Mrs. Fenwick, wrapped in sable and grief, her face pale but composed. She took her seat without a word, eyes fixed on the rug. Vivian Starr entered minutes later, perfume preceding her, every gesture precise as though she were on stage. She sat with a defiant tilt of the chin, but her hands trembled in her lap. Then came Oscar Latimer, filling the doorway like a ship in dock. He barked a greeting at no one in particular, and dropped into his chair, shoulders straining his suit. Finally, Inspector Kramer arrived, cigar clamped between his teeth, overcoat open, jaw working with irritation. He refused a chair, preferring to loom near the bookshelves, glaring smoke-free fury at Wolfe. The room settled into silence. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, surveyed the assembly and spoke. "You are gathered," he said slowly, "because 2 men are dead. Howard Fenwick, lawyer. Carter Lang, broker. Both deaths clothed as suicide, both false. Their ends share a common cause, and that cause sits among you. Latimer snorted. Dramatics. Be silent, Wolfe said, his tone glacial. You will have your moment. Mrs. Fenwick stirred uneasily. Miss Starr's eyes darted from face to face. Kramer grunted. Wolfe continued, his words deliberate, each falling like a stone in water. Fenwick was a blackmailer. He had learned secrets. Miss Starr's clandestine marriage, Lang's financial deceptions, others perhaps, but these suffice. He extracted money with threats. He pressed too far. Vivian Starr rose half an inch in her chair. Wolfe raised a hand. You will remain seated, madam. You paid him once. That is established. You feared exposure, yet you did not kill him. Others had stronger cause. Her shoulders sagged. Lang, Wolfe said, turning his gaze upon no one since Lang was not present, was in greater peril. Fenwick held him utterly. His ruin lay in a single revelation. He went to Fenwick. He killed him. That was the first death. Mrs. Fenwick gasped softly. Kramer snapped. Can you prove that? Not to the standard of a courtroom, Wolfe admitted. But to reason, yes. Lang's books were unbalanced, his demeanour frantic, his alibi spurious. He called here in desperation. My assistant did not answer. He was lost. I kept my expression steady and took the sting in silence. But, Wolfe went on, Lang might have concealed his crime had it not been observed. Oscar Latimer was at the Bonfort Hotel that same evening. He inquired for Fenwick's room. He was seen. And in Fenwick's room a scrap of paper bore his name. Further, an ashtray contained cigarettes of a brand not Fenwick's but Latimer's. Small details, yet cumulative. Latimer shifted, face reddening. Lies, he growled. Circumstantial rubbish. Wolfe ignored the interruption. Thus Latimer knew. He saw or learned what had occurred. He confronted Lang. He used it as leverage. But Lang, already desperate, could not endure both guilt and extortion, so Latimer silenced him. Lang's death too was dressed as suicide, but it was murder, by Latimer's hand. The shipping magnate surged to his feet. Outrageous! His voice shook the window panes. I'll not be slandered by a glutton in a chair. Sit, Wolfe said with finality, or leave in custody. Kramer stepped forward, jaw set. You're accusing Latimer of both murders? Yes. On what? Kramer barked. Cigarettes and a scrap of paper? And opportunity, Wolfe said calmly. And arrogance. Latimer denied even being at the hotel, though two men saw him. He sweated in that chair when confronted. He blustered as he blusters now. A guilty man denies too much. Vivian Starr whispered, It's true, he lied. He was there. Latimer swung toward her, fists clenched, but Kramer blocked him with a step. Easy, Kramer warned. You make one move and you'll be wearing bracelets. Mrs. Fenwick spoke at last, voice trembling. Is it certain? That man— She could not finish. Wolfe inclined his head, certain enough for justice. Fenwick fell to Lang's fear. Lang fell to Latimer's greed. Two men dead because power fed upon weakness. The room went still. The only sound was Kramer's teeth grinding on the cigar. At length he spat the mangled stub into his palm and growled, Damn you, Wolfe, you've boxed me again. All right. Latimer, you're coming. Latimer bellowed protest, but the weight of the evidence hung heavy, and Kramer's men were already waiting below. Wolfe closed his eyes, folding his hands. Archie, see them out. I rose, ushering the shaken guests toward the door. The confrontation had played its act, the curtain falling not with applause but with silence. The front door shut with the weight of finality, Inspector Kramer's barked orders echoing faintly from the stoop before the street swallowed them. His men were hauling Latimer down the steps, the magnate's furious protests rattling the air. From where I stood, halfway to the office door, I could still hear the rhythm of his boots dragging against the stone, the scrape of metal as the patrol wagon's door clanged shut. Inside the brownstone, calm returned by degrees. Mrs. Fenwick dabbed at her eyes with a folded handkerchief, her posture sagging now that the storm had passed. Vivian Starr had already swept out in a rustle of silk and perfume, her exit as abrupt as her entrances always were. The room smelled of her still, a faint cloud overlaying the sharper tang of cigar leaf that Kramer's presence invariably left clinging to the drapes. Wolfe remained in his chair, unmoving, lids lowered, as though the ordeal had cost him no more than a sip of beer. He raised that glass now, took the measured draught and replaced it on the polished coaster. The silence grew too thick, so I crossed the rug and pulled open the curtains. The street lamps glowed against the pane, slicing the office into amber bars. Mrs. Fenwick rose unsteadily. "Mr. Wolfe," her voice trembled, "I cannot. There are no words. You have saved my husband's name. I shall be grateful forever." Wolfe inclined his head, but offered no reply. She looked to me instead, eyes brimming, lips parting as though for another expression of thanks. I gestured gently toward the hall. "Fritz will see you out, Mrs. Fenwick. You'll be safe." She pressed my hand briefly, then let Fritz guide her away. The door closed, the echo fading into the walls. The house at last belonged again to its occupants. I turned back to Wolfe. He had not moved save for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His eyes, half shut, regarded the ceiling beams as though the solution of the case had been carved into the wood. "Well," I said, dropping into my desk chair, "that ties it up. Fenwick started the avalanche, Lang tried to dodge it, Latimer thought he could ride it, and Kramer just carted him off to the city can. A neat finish, if you ask me." "No," Wolfe said, his tone cut sharper than I expected. He shifted, fingers steepling over his middle. "It is not neat. It is sordid, wasteful, and imperfect. Nothing about this affair merits satisfaction." I tilted back. 2 deaths explained, murderer in custody, widow cleared, clients dispersed. What's imperfect? "You know." His eyes opened fully now and fixed on me. "That telephone, the call you did not take, that is the imperfection." I grimaced. "We're back to that, are we? Wolfe, I've been kicking myself from here to Yonkers for letting it ring. You want me to draw blood too?" "You will restrain your flippancy," he said coldly. "Howard Fenwick sought me. He was in fear. His call was urgent. Had you answered, had you conveyed him to me, I should have taken his measure. Perhaps I could not have prevented his death. Perhaps. But there exists the possibility, and possibility is enough. By neglect, you lessened that chance." I sat forward, temper rising. I was at the table. Fritz was standing over me with soup in one hand and reproach in the other. "You're the one who insists meals be sacred. You can't rebuke me for following your own gospel." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not impute your indolence to my discipline. Meals may be sacrosanct, but duty is not suspended. You had liberty to excuse yourself. You did not." The silence thickened again. I stared at him across the desk, his immovable bulk, his absolute conviction. The accusation weighed heavier than Kramer's scowls. Finally I muttered, "All right, I'll answer every call from now on. I'll sleep with the phone under my pillow if it'll make you happy." Wolfe closed his eyes once more. He lifted the glass, drank and set it down. His lips moved in that final judgment tone that made juries unnecessary. "That would be superfluous. One call sufficed." I leaned back, exhaling hard. "Superfluous. That's your idea of comfort?" "Comfort is irrelevant," Wolfe said. "What matters is accuracy." I rubbed my forehead. "You've got a talent, boss. Not every man can wrap up a double homicide, expose a shipping king as a killer, and still make his assistant feel like the goat of the evening." His eyes remained closed. "You are not a goat. You are a man, capable of responsibility, and therefore subject to rebuke." The words stung more than if he had shouted. I let the silence hang, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the faint clatter from the kitchen where Fritz stacked dishes with unnecessary vigour. The smell of broth drifted faintly under the office door. I said at last, "Fenwick's gone, Lang's gone, Latimer's going to the Tombs, Mrs. Fenwick will patch her life, Vivian will keep the spotlight, and Kramer will collect headlines he doesn't deserve, and me, I'll get a lecture every time the phone rings." "You will get a reminder," Wolfe said. "Not for every ring, but for the one that mattered. One mistake suffices to mark a man's memory." I picked up my notebook, flipped it closed, and tossed it lightly on the desk. "Then consider it marked. You'll never see me let another call go unanswered, not even if Fritz himself marches in with a flaming pan." From the hall, Fritz's voice rose, indignant. "I heard that, Archie." I grinned despite myself. Wolfe's lips twitched almost imperceptibly before resuming their solemn line. The city outside continued its racket. Horns, brakes, the faint shouts of boys hawking papers with Latimer's name already blazoned across the front page. The office, in contrast, held its calm, as though it had digested murder, greed, and scandal, and returned to equilibrium. I stood, stretching the kinks from my shoulders. "Anything else tonight, boss?" "No." Wolfe reached for another glass, poured his beer with practised hand, and lifted it to the light. The amber caught the lamp glow, rich and untroubled. "We are finished, until the next ring." I paused at the doorway, hand on the knob, and looked back. He sat there like a carved figure, immense, motionless, the weight of the world balanced in his silence. The beer glass touched his lips. He drank, eyes closed, judgment complete. And though the case was solved, though the murderer was gone, I knew the echo of that unanswered call would follow me longer than any memory of Latimer's rage or Fenwick's desperation. It had shaped the ending, as Wolfe had said. One call sufficed.